Hello, room. I know we are already a couple of minutes early. It's 1:59, so we're going to give a couple of minutes for people to arrive. We already have about 30 attendees, and this is Evelyn Badia, and I just want to say thank you. On my side of the world, it's good afternoon. I see we have people from Northern California and Germany and even Tokyo, and I'm so excited because Chip Conley from Airbnb chose to honor us with his presence and his knowledge of many, many, many years. So let me stop sharing the
Am I
screen.
that old?
On?
Am I that old?
No, you're not that old. You're just that experienced.
I've had experience. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I've been hosting for about 5 years, and I feel like I have a PhD, and I
Yeah.
still have so much stuff that I'm like, oh, wait, that's a great idea.
Yeah. And actually, what I'm going to talk about today is you really have a PhD in psychology, because in many ways, the best hosts are great psychologists. But I will wait. We're going to wait a couple more minutes. And I'm really pleased to be with you, Evelyn, because you're one of my favorite hosts in the world, because you share the love. You share the love with other people. And people who have big hearts usually are pretty good hosts, and that describes you.
Oh, thank you so much, Chip. And you know, I've been telling this to everybody. I was like, I've been so amazingly surprised of your availability during this process, because, you know, everybody out there in on the webinar is like, you're a busy man, you're a traveling man, and you have always responded on time. You're a great host, I must say.
Well, it's funny. Here's my point. If I take 5 days to respond to your email, even if I'm really busy, I'm not sending a very good role model. And I'm not saying that everybody at Airbnb can live to that standard that I try to live for myself, because there are a variety of different people here. But I better, as the head of hospitality for the company, be at a standard that's as high as I can set. And my team in the hospitality team knows I'm a little crazy about that, but I do think responsiveness is an indicator for whether people feel respected or not.
Yes.
You hear back from someone quickly and in a friendly manner, all of a sudden you have a good rapport and you feel like, okay, this person likes me.
Yeah, and you know, the amazing thing is, last month I was going to do a webinar with someone else, and we had already set up, you know, I have an art department, not an art department, I have a great amazing
That's
person
impressive.
that has, he works with me on my art department stuff, because I don't do any of those graphics. And we had set up everything, but I still needed some information from this person, and then he disappeared for like 2 days, and I was like, I'm like 5 days away, and I needed to announce it, and I was like, forget it, we got to do it with just a Q&A with me. And I was like, in comparison, I'm like, you are not as busy as Chip, okay? And Chip, you gave me everything immediately. You were like, no, let's get rid of this. So, I mean, it is also the whole concept of it gets rid of things on your to-do list. You're not dragging them on.
Yeah.
And one of my biggest things with hosts is like, if you answer an inquiry within the first half an hour, you're going to stop that guest from continuing to look.
That's right. That's right.
Because they are at that moment of asking you and sending you an inquiry, they're still searching and they're still looking. And if you answer, like, my thing is like response within 15 minutes. You have an app, you know, if possible. You know, if it's the middle of the night, they're not going to get an answer from you until the next morning. But if possible, answer as quickly as possible, because you're stopping their process and you're already letting the guests know how important and how on top of your job is. You know, how you are as a host. And that's today's first tip.
Well, that is one of the tips I'm going to be giving. But are you ready to start? Should we go?
Yeah, let's start. We have about 41 attendees at the moment, and they're coming in. I think we could start. So again, this is my little disclaimer, guys. This is Evelyn Badia, and I am your host. This is a webinar from me, even though I have amazing Chip Conley from Airbnb. This is not an Airbnb sponsored event. Anything discussed here sometimes it's not really Airbnb's, you know, approved language. So, you know, they'll say, well, Airbnb told us this, because it's not that. This is all my personal stuff, and thankfully Chip decided to join us for a short and quick conversation about hosting. So please, Chip.
Well, thank you, Evelyn, and welcome to everybody from around the globe who has tapped into this. We're going to spend about a half an hour going over what I think are the 5 most simple truths and tips that I've learned from the best hosts around the world. Then we'll open it up for some Q&A, so you can ask me some questions as well. What's interesting about these 5 tips is that all of these are accessible to you. None of the ones I'm going to talk about today are so over the top that you're going to say, oh, I can't do that. So I will say that, take each one of them and factor it in terms of how you could do that every day. But the first thing I want to say is that basically, in order to be a great host, you don't need a hospitality degree from a Swiss hotel school. What you do need is a little bit of a degree in psychology. So I'm going to start with 2 truisms about the psychology of guests. And the first one is that we as humans are judging animals. Now let me explain what that means. The more complicated our lives, and modern life is pretty complicated, we have a lot on our plates. The more complicated our lives, the more we have to make snap judgments about things. So that means you see something and you say yes, no, good, bad, etc. Now that sometimes gets us in trouble in making prejudgments that are just inaccurate, or there's all kinds of ways that can be bad, but it is how humans are in the modern world. And the reason I bring that up is because what I'm going to talk about today are some of the moments of truth when guests are most likely to judge you. So if you can actually master those moments of truth in a way that your guests or your prospective guests are going to judge you in a positive way, you're way ahead of other hosts who don't do that. So first of all, I like to think of Airbnb as almost like blind dating. Now, for some of you, like, oh, that sounds scary. No, we're not trying to actually set you up on a matchmaking trip or anything like that. But it is a little bit like blind dating in the sense that someone's setting you up. You're looking at, if you're a guest, you're looking at a collection of different choices, and you're having to try to make snap judgments on which one's going to be right for you. Okay, so the first truth about psychology is that humans judge quickly. So we need to keep that in mind. The second truism about psychology is an equation. I call this an emotional equation. Disappointment equals expectations minus reality. Think about that for a moment. Think about the times in your life when you've been disappointed. It might have been your honeymoon. Did you have an expectation when you're going on your honeymoon that something was going to happen? And we won't get into I'm not going to become your psychologist here and talk about your honeymoon, but I will say that when you had an expectation about something, that something was going to be like this, and the reality is like this, the difference between expectation and reality is disappointment. And actually, if your expectation was down here and your reality was here, the difference is delight. So the equation for successful hosts is managing expectations of your prospective guests and improving reality, because you have really 2 variables there in disappointment equals expectations minus reality. You can either manage expectations so people don't have too much, they don't expect too much, or you improve the reality in terms of how you're hosting so that people have an amazing experience. All right, so those are the 2 basic truths of psychology that I wanted to start with. And now I'm going to get into a discussion about the 5 tips that I think are the most usable by hosts around the world. And I've actually taught these tips in 20 different markets, 20 different cities around the world. In fact, Evelyn and I saw each other in Brooklyn a couple months ago when I actually taught some of these details in a class there. So the first tip is this. Our currency on Airbnb is trust. The faster you build trust, the faster you're going to get the booking. So what does that mean? It basically means that if people are human animals, they're judging, the faster you can actually have that guest judge you as a trustworthy person, the better. And we were just talking about that a couple moments ago, and there's a couple ways you can do that. The second tip I'm going to talk about will be responsiveness. And so I think that's really an important one. But the first tip I'm going to talk about is how you write a listing that creates trust. Let me tell you this number one tip. I love this tip more than any of the other ones I'm going to tell you today, because to me, it's the fastest way to build trust. Imagine if you were a guest and you went to a listing and you saw some great photos. And let me say, great photos are really important. Having a caption under the photo is even more important. That's a new detail we didn't know 6 months ago. Based upon user testing, guest testing, is a caption under a photo is exceptionally important. But imagine you're looking at a listing and you saw a host in the listing in the first paragraph say the following. They say, here are 3 things that people love about my place. And they list 3 different things. And then in the next sentence, they say, here are 2 things that some guests don't like about my listing. Now, for some of you right now, you're hearing me and you're thinking, oh my gosh, that's stupid. Why would any host ever tell prospective guests about things that some guests don't like? Well, let me tell you why I think it's a great idea. Number one is disappointment equals expectations minus reality. So it's really important to manage the expectations of your potential guests, because if you don't do that, they may be disappointed. Secondly, you want to get the right kind of guest. And for some kind of guests, the fact that you have a 4-story walk-up building with no elevator is a fact you should reveal really early on. And in fact, for me, when I first saw a host who did this in Europe, the 3 things they said were amazing about their place is they had the best view from almost any apartment building in their city. Well, that sounded great. Number 2 is they said they had lots of light, lots of natural light, which sounded great as well. And number 3 is they said every morning there was a basket full of baked goods that they would leave in front of my room. Well, I love that. And you know, Evelyn, you're a baker. You're pretty good at it in the kitchen. So I'm sure you know those are great. But here's the thing that got me. It wasn't those things. It was the fact that this host said, here's 2 things some people don't like. And the first thing they said, this host said, is I'm on the 4th floor of a building and there's no elevator. For some guests, that would be like, okay, I'm not going to book that. But for me, I'm pretty fit, and so I like that. I didn't mind that. So that was a bad thing, but not bad for me. And then the second thing that she said in her listing was, I'm on the 4th floor of a building. On the 1st floor, there's a very successful brunch and breakfast restaurant. It has a cafe. And starting at about 8 o'clock in the morning, it gets noisy. Well, the truth is, Chip Conley, if you know Chip Conley, I wake up really early in the morning no matter where I am, including if I'm in Europe, even though I live in San Francisco. In fact, this is coming to you from the Founders Den here at Airbnb headquarters. So when I'm traveling, I get up early. So the fact it's noisy at 8 a.m. doesn't matter to me. So the 2 things that she said some guests don't like were 2 things that didn't matter to me. But the most important thing here is the fact that she actually was self-aware enough to know what is great about her place and not so great, and was authentic enough and candid enough to tell me that, meant that I trusted her from that point forward. And I booked her listing because I felt like this is somebody I can trust. So if the currency is trust, the faster you can build trust, the better. And the best way to build trust is to actually be really honest. Does that make sense, Evelyn?
Oh, totally. And, you know, it is amazing the amount of questions that people have. And one of the things that has happened, you mentioned, you talked about the captions on the photos. And what happens is people do not read descriptions. Yeah. I have not read descriptions, believe me. And I'm a host. And your captions, your photos, thing. And I've always tell the host, look, if you have an item where you have like that small staircase to go to a second level, or you have a pet, showing it on your captions and showing you a photo and putting a caption, it reinforces that communication and that trust. Right. Because there's no surprises. Right. Your guest is not arriving and saying, oh, you have cats, and I didn't know you had cats, because you buried it on the description. Instead of a photo of your cat in your house, being very clear about what are the limitations of your home. Your home is ideal for you and it's perfect for you, but it might not be perfect for all the guests. So I think I love that tip. And believe me, I keep thinking about like, how can I go about, what are those two things that people might not love?
Well, and you can figure that out partly by sometimes the reviews or even private notes, or even just sometimes you can, you meet a guest and you can sort of understand there's something that they don't love. And that's why I say three things that people love and two things that some guests don't like. So it's not all guests, it's just some guests. Okay, so let's go to the second one. So the second key tip relates to your responsiveness. And Evelyn, you and I were talking about earlier just in terms of how I try to operate. I do think of Airbnb as like a blind date, and guests are going to judge your responsiveness as an indicator of what kind of host you'll be. So being fast in your response and friendly shows you as being someone who's efficient and gets things done, that you care about them, the person actually feels respected. So there's a lot of things, whether it's your professionalism, your friendliness, your trustworthiness, those are indicators based upon how quickly and how friendly you are in your response. Now, just being fast in a response can be very transactional too. So the other thing to do is to be very focused on how can you actually customize an amazing experience for this guest? Because this is actually a time in the response with the guest where you can actually have a conversation, get a conversation going. Why are they coming to town? What is it that they're looking for? Because sometimes somebody's coming to town and they're looking for something, and you can figure out pretty quickly you're not going to be able to offer that. So either that's an indicator of why you wouldn't actually say yes to them, or it ultimately could be an indicator of what you need to do to make sure that they just know what the experience will be like. So I would say the second important tip is the following. Be responsive, but also learn something about the guest. Mm-hmm. By learning something about the guest, you can personalize or customize suggestions of what that guest can do based upon what they're looking to do on their visit to your city. So I'll give you a quick example. I went to Rome. I was on my Hospitality Moments of Truth tour. I was staying next to the Vatican. It was very fun. And there was a host named Paolo. Paolo did a little bit of research on me, and of course he knew that he had the head of global hospitality staying with him, so he did extra research, I'm sure. But he learned that I was a huge fan of Rumi, the poet. Rumi is a very famous poet. He was originally born in Afghanistan, spent time in what's now Iran, and he lived in Turkey. So he knew I loved Rumi, and actually the name Rumi for the poet 750 years ago came from the fact that the Romans actually, I think, were overseeing the area of Turkey. So Rumi came from the name from Rome, and I was in Rome. And so my host, Paolo, figured out that I love Rumi. He also read something about me and the fact that one of the things I miss sometimes from hotels, since I'm a hotelier for a long time, is I miss room service. So this guy, Paolo, out of the blue, said to me, he gave me a book of Rumi poetry in Italian, and he says, as an Airbnb host, I can't give you room service, but I can give you Rumi service. So why is that relevant? Well, it was sweet to get a book of Italian poetry. I don't read Italian, but it was a nice thought. But more than anything, what it said to me is that Paolo cared about me. And he was trying to do something that was going to give me a memory that I would tell my friends about. In fact, I ended up taking a picture of me and Paolo with the book, and I put it on Facebook. And all of a sudden, there were all these friends of mine who actually wanted to know about this listing in Rome, because when they go to Rome, they're going to go stay with Paolo. So just know that customizing the experience for your guests based upon your guests' interests or what their intention of their trip is allows you to create a more memorable experience. Does that make sense, Evelyn?
Totally, and here you are telling us all about it, and I've heard this story before, so I mean it was great that he's talked to you a little bit and found out all this information about you, and sometimes we just don't have that information for all the guests, but sometimes our guests will tell us, I'm going for a wedding, or it's my wedding anniversary, and it's great. Like I have had people here coming for birthdays, so I'll give them some flowers, or make sure I don't provide any alcohol, and I have a big rule about that, just because I drink, but I don't know people's experiences about alcohol or religious or anything like that, so I'm a little bit sensitive about that, so I don't provide wine or anything of that nature. But I will give them some flowers or tell them, look, this is a great restaurant to go for an invitation if you're coming for a wedding and there's a big group and all of that. So I think it was great what he did, and he even went and said, look, this is the difference between us, and I know you're missing room service.
Yeah, exactly.
But let me make it up to you.
That's right. So the third tip I'll give you, it comes back to a statement you've probably heard before, which is you never get a second chance to make a first impression. Now, of course, the real first impression may be your listing, or it may be how you respond. But in the physical world, the first impression, if you think back to your first impression when you stayed in a hotel sometime, it's when you show up at the front desk, or actually you show up and you go into your room for the first time. So I call this the 5 senses test. Now there's many different ways you can create a great sense of arrival for a guest, giving really good directions to the guest of how to get to your place will hopefully make for a better experience. Travel and safety tips. The key exchange, of course, is very important. And having like a house manual and even a welcome note. All of those things can create a really great first impression when a person arrives. But here's my tip, and this tip actually comes from me. The other 4 tips I'm going to give you are all things I've learned from hosts, but this is the Chip Conley tip from my boutique hotel days. One of the things we did, I created 52 boutique hotels over the course of about 25 years. One of the things we learned is that when someone comes to their guest room or they come to the lobby of a hotel, they don't judge you just based upon what things look like. They use all 5 of their senses. And that's why I call this the 5 senses test. So think about the following. When someone arrives in your home or your apartment and they're actually going in for the first time, how could you positively stimulate the 5 senses of your guest as they arrive? Let me use an example. Let's say your listing basically says, well, I'll use that example of the one earlier where the woman who had the place with a beautiful view and she's got lots of natural light. And so maybe I have this impression based upon the listing that this is going to be a really relaxing, tranquil place that's really quite beautiful. So maybe when I arrive, now she might not be able to be there because we can't always be there, but maybe she knows about when you're going to arrive, and she actually has some music playing when you arrive. You actually have the key. I mean, if she's there, great. If you're there, even better. But let's say someone's arriving and you just have some nice, soft music playing. It just sets the mood. Now, if you're going to be there, you might even have an aromatherapy candle burning. You might actually have a basket of fruit really visible when you arrive, or a bouquet of flowers. But anything you can do to stimulate the 5 senses and move beyond just the visual, because a lot of us get very fixated on the visual, but interestingly enough, scientists have told us the memory, the sense that gives us the most memory, it's easiest for us to remember, is our olfactory sense, our sense of smell. So think about the variety of ways you can actually stimulate positively a sense of smell. So this is not an easy one, and it's not something some hosts feel like they can do, but even if you just got 2 or 3 of the 5 senses, you're probably doing better than the average host.
Yes, and in reference of the scent one, I'm allergic, so I clean with everything like free and everything else. But I have found one particular scent that I like, which is a little linen scent. So it doesn't have to be anything strong. We did a webinar with Elle Callahan, and one of the things that came out of that one was clean does not have a scent. Clean is pure and it doesn't have a scent. But you could still create a little scent for your home that feels true to you, who you are. You could even have like some lavender flowers in the house. During the holidays, you could do a little bit of if you boil water with cinnamon sticks or I don't know.
Yep.
In English.
Yeah, I know a host who loves to bake bread, and their unit, the host unit, is right below the guest unit, and so she bakes bread, the day that the guest is arriving, and there's the scent of baking bread, and those are the kinds of things that create a unique homespun kind of feeling that makes people
Yes.
feel very comfortable. All right. So
Yes, and
go ahead.
Corinne is saying here that there's guests that are sensitive to fragrances, and they do tend to tell you beforehand. I've had guests tell me, how do you wash your clothes? How do you wash the linens and everything else? And just be, follow their lead. If they cannot have any sense, don't have anything in your home that might have any strong scents.
That's right.
So be true to that, and that's part of the communication.
Yep, that's exactly right. All right, number 4 is guests rarely ask for help. So you need to put out a welcome mat for support. There's a statistic I remember from years and years ago as a hotelier, and that's 87% of guests in a hotel who have a minor to mid-level problem do not actually address it with the front desk. They just try to deal with it themselves. Now, I bet in an Airbnb situation, especially if you have guests in a home where you're not there, I bet that percentage is even higher, because a lot of times the guest doesn't want to bother you, or they think it's minor and they'll just sort of deal with it. So the best advice I can give here, and the tip that I've seen great hosts do here, is within the first 24 hours. And if someone's only staying with you for a day or two, then do it even sooner than that. But if someone's staying for 4 or 5 days, make sure it's within 24 hours. Check in with the guest. Write a message to the guest, or if they're staying with you, write a note or just check in and say, how is everything? And say, if they're coming to visit you in Brooklyn, say, have you had a chance to get out and see the neighborhood yet? Or be very specific. How do you like the apartment? Is everything the way you expected it to be? And do you have any questions? Sometimes the question a person's going to have is, wow, it takes 2 minutes for the hot water to come on in the shower. Am I doing something wrong? And in fact, it may be that they are doing something wrong. So by actually putting the welcome mat out and saying, is everything the way you expected it to be, you're actually giving the guest the opportunity to ask a question that may make their stay even better. Thoughts, Evelyn?
Yes, and one of the things that I always say is answer the guest questions before they ask. Right. Let your guidebook be really honest from, and I spent years on my guidebook, but it's like from your Wi-Fi to where's the restaurant, where's that pharmacy that you like, because sending somebody to just go to Google or just go to Yelp, it's like you have insider information that you're the local, your neighborhood, that great little coffee place that you could send your guests to. And I think a guidebook is huge. It's a huge tool to have. And the one thing is, Chip, believe me, I have one of my listings I share with the guest, and I have asked the guest point blank in the morning, hey, is everything okay? Do you need anything? And they say it's fine. And then in the private comments, once they review me, they were like, oh, I wish I had more washcloths. And I was like, honey, I could have fixed that in a second. So what I tend to do now is I give them extra towels in the closet with washcloths, and I have a little basket with anything they might be missing, from a little bit of lotion to suntan lotion, because in New York you still get burned. So it's anticipating the questions.
Anticipating questions is exactly right. And don't take it personally. I know some hosts, especially in their first few months of hosting, can take it personally when someone gives them some private feedback or even a review that is not as good as they wanted. Don't take it personally. Know that this is part of the education process, and that generally speaking, most guests are very cautious about giving you feedback because they don't want to create conflict. So,
yeah, and Chip, I have a story to tell you with that one. I had a guest who was she was here for the U.S. Open. She was a tennis player. And on her exit, on the Airbnb platform, on a private message, she tells me, oh, I smell a gas in one of your closets and stuff like that. I'm like, I had a gas leak in my house. And she chose not to tell me until she's leaving the house and on a review. It's not even like, had I not looked at my reviews immediately, I would have been like, okay, is my house going to blow up or something?
You might not be here now.
Exactly. But it's like, it's to that degree that they don't tell you stuff.
Also, one last thought on this tip, and then I'll go to the final 5th tip, is if something goes wrong, if something is wrong or something did go wrong, being responsive is important. and have just a bag of tricks. Have things, whether it's flowers, whether it's, some people, in your case, Evelyn, you don't like giving wine. Some people like that, giving like a local wine, or giving a set of postcards. Do something to make the guests feel like you heard them and you appreciate the fact that they had a little problem that you got solved.
Yeah, and the reality is, Chip, the guests are so amazing. The Airbnb guests, it's just a whole different ball game, because I had guests arriving the next day, and my house got shut down by the gas company, and there was no hot water. And I gave the option to the upcoming guests. I was like, look, you could cancel. I could put you up in a hotel. And they're like, no. I was like, I have hot water for a day.
Yep.
And I'm trying to resolve the problem, and I was able, thankfully, to resolve it within 24 hours. But it's like, and they still gave me a good review. But it's honesty and being upfront so that you guests know what's coming, and they know that the emergencies happen.
All right. Fifth tip is turn a stranger into a friend. Be proactive about staying in touch. The truth is that a lot of people think by the time a person's actually leaving you, that you've either built a relationship or you haven't. But sometimes the best part of the relationship's right there at the end, when you can actually give them a memory that they can actually take with them. That could be as simple as taking a picture. When I took that picture with Paolo, I mentioned earlier, he gave me that book of Rumi poetry. When I took a picture with him, or he had his friend take a picture of the two of us, not only did I have something that I could take with me, but I actually then shared that with a lot of friends. And when I shared that, all of a sudden he had some marketing. But the best advice I could give here, the really simple tip is this. Within the first day or two after the guest leaves, write them a private message and just say, thank you for staying with me. And just be really gracious. And if there's something more specific you can talk about, just talk about it that was a great memory of what you had. Because the truth is, when a guest gets a message from you saying thank you, and you're doing it not in the form of a review, you're just doing it in a private message, that guest is more likely to review you, and more likely to review you positively. You're more likely to get 5 stars. So that's the simple fifth. The tip is just go out, be the first one, be the proactive one to say thank you for coming to stay with me within a day or two after they've left.
Yes, and I think that's a great thing. Is also, wish them a good travels, wish them that they had a good trip going back home, or sometimes they're not going straight back home. It's a little bit of a reminder for them to review you, because reviews are huge. When a guest is looking for a space to stay, and it has been my experience and my friends that I speak to who are guests as well, and it's like they look at photos and then reviews. Description, it gets like, and please don't put 50 photos. Yeah. And don't give me the bed from one angle and then another angle and then the headboard and then no. 20 photos max.
Yep. Let me give you a recap of these 5 tips and then a summary thought, and then we'll open up for Q&A. And I also see that my battery on this laptop is running low, so I may move over to a corner here where I can get some additional power. Here's the 5 tips. Number 1 is create trust by being candid about 3 things people love about your listing and 2 things that some people don't like. So be authentic and open in your listing. Number 2 is, make sure I get my glasses on, be fast and friendly in your initial responses and get to know the guest so you can customize some suggestions for their visit. Number 3 is make a great physical first impression by positively stimulating the 5 senses of your guest when they first arrive. Number 4 is be accessible to your guests by sending them a message in the first few hours or the first day of their stay, asking them how things are going and if they have any questions. And number 5, create a great memory by writing a message to the guests within a couple days after they've left, as it's more likely you'll get a positive review as a result. In sum, hospitality is really just about being human. I mean, some of us think that we have to go to hotel school to learn this stuff. No, you just need to be empathetic, organized, and somebody who can clearly show a guest that they matter. And if a guest feels like they matter, they're going to remember that. So I like to tell hosts that being a great host is being a hero. It's helping create a memory for a guest. In some cases, it's helping a guest in a difficult situation, because when a traveler is traveling far away from home, sometimes they have special needs that you can help out with. But at the end of the day, being a great host means that you're a great human. And being a great human means you understand psychology. It means that you understand what's going on in the head and the heart of your guests. So let's open it up for some questions and see if people have any questions. And you may see me move here in a moment because I'm gonna try to actually get some power here in the corner.
Please power up.
Yeah.
So one of the questions they asked was, do superhost properties no longer get preferred placement in search results? I don't know if that's something that you could answer. It would be great, host, if we ask more about hospitality than about product itself. But Chip, will you know the answer to that one?
I do. So Superhost, here we go. Superhost, the elements, there's four different determinants of superhosts, and all four of those determinants have an influence on search ranking. But they're not the only things that have a determinant on search ranking. There are other things as well that influence search ranking. But generally speaking, I can say that when someone actually has superhost status, it improves their likelihood that they have very good search ranking.
Good to know. I didn't know that one. I have heard that also having verified photos improves your search ranking.
Yes.
So that even if you have one or two, also I know checking your calendar every day brings you up.
Yeah. That helps as well. There are a variety. There's so many different elements. But one thing I want to make sure that people understand about search, because this is actually changing in 2015 and will change even more in 2016, is we are looking more and more at how to match the right guest with the right host. So if you had two different guests doing a search of London, of a certain neighborhood in London, and these two guests were very different guests, but they were looking for the exact same dates, they could get very different search results of what listings come up based upon what we know about that guest, what price range they're looking for, what kind of places they've liked in the past. The more a guest actually stays with Airbnb, the better a sense we have of what they're going to like. So over time, Airbnb is going to be more and more matching guests and hosts, which means that search results will actually be more customized.
Okay, that's excellent. That's excellent. Yeah, because not everybody's going to like the same kind of places. And I know right now, because now you have 5 years of, 8 years of Airbnb history, and you have guests that have been living in the Airbnb platform for that long, you could tell their searches and what they want and what they don't want. I actually, somebody has a question here about, this is from Christy, and she says, I list everything about me and mi casita. Why I get a request, some don't have a picture profile or are verified? Which is
great question.
The biggest always complaint.
I think one of the biggest complaints I hear from hosts around the world is that we need to do a better job at Airbnb of onboarding our guests, which basically means helping our guests know what it means to be a great guest, both while they're staying with you, but also in their process of searching for a place. So one of the things we're working on this summer is a whole guest education process that will actually mean that our guests are going to be better educated about verified ID and verified photo, or having photos of themselves, a picture of them, not their cat, so you can actually sort of see who they are as a guest. And so you're going to see a lot of improvements in the second half of the year around guest education.
Oh, that would be fantastic, because and of course I talked about Airbnb to everybody that I get to meet, and I was talking to someone at a bar in San Diego. I was there for a conference, and her first question was, what's the difference between Craigslist and Airbnb? So I had to tell her, well, first of all, we as hosts, we don't get paid until 24 hours after arrival, just in case you have a problem with the facility or it's not what you wanted or there's some issues. And that was like, that they don't know some information is huge. Believe me, I was like, I think I'm going to have to do some guest videos to teach them what are the main differences between us and all the other different platforms. Another question that this is Regina. She's asking, when is San Antonio going to get photographers?
Oh, it's a great question. I didn't know San Antonio doesn't have photographers. So send me an email at chip@airbnb.com, and I can pass that on to our photography department, because San Antonio seems like it's a big enough city that we should have photographers there soon enough. I'm sorry that we don't have one there yet.
Okay, so now everybody, I'm going to write that out as well in the comments and say it's chip@airbnb.com. Please don't send him, dirty pictures, okay, people? All right. Also, Noah is asking, can you give examples of personalizing? For example, getting personal info on your guests before they come.
Yeah, I would say be cautious with this. I gave a good example of Paolo in Rome doing some research on me in advance. So I would just say most guests will like this, some might not. So don't get into like very deep personal things about a guest, but you could ask questions of a guest. Why are you coming to town? And they say, okay, I'm coming to town for business. Oh, so where will your business meetings going to be? Because I can actually tell you more about that neighborhood. Do you know the city very well? You're coming to town for a convention. Do you need any restaurant reservations at night or recommendations, since you may be taking clients out? So I think just being gracious, but also being very savvy and intuitive about whether the person wants to keep it very private. If someone wants to keep it private, give them their privacy.
Yes, exactly. Not everybody's friendly, guys. And you have to take your cues from your guest, if your guest is going to communicate with you or not, and that's okay. Look, my biggest thing is like there's some guests that I love and there's some guests that I love to seek out, and I try not to be like oh. But you don't create friendships with them. Right now I have a guest with me this is the 4th time in my home, whom I love and adore, and they walk in and it's like, oh my God, it's a love fest. And there's others that is like, oh, okay, I like you. We don't have to love each other. It's okay. So we have a question from Taz, who's asking, does Airbnb do anything for listings that have bad reviews? I read some listings with bad reviews, and I feel bad because it is ruining the reputation of those listings that do our best.
Well, I think that's a hard question for me to answer without knowing specifics. Some listings and some hosts deserve bad reviews. I mean, let's be honest.
Yeah.
Not all hosts and not all listings are well run. And one of the things we've really tried to do last year, we made a change in the reviews process such that hosts and guests, their reviews are simultaneously posted. So that way, if you're a guest and you had a bad experience, rather than give no review, which is what a lot of guests did, you could actually do the review, but you could know that it's not going to be visible publicly until the host leaves their review. And so by doing that, it meant a lot more guests gave reviews and were more candid in their reviews. And the reviews are part of our trust, of how we build trust. So I do think that if a host is a new host and your first review or one of your first reviews is not great, don't worry. You can get some additional new reviews. Sometimes it does mean you're going to have to actually drop your price a little bit, because your listing search results might actually drop a little bit if your reviews aren't good. But I've seen so many hosts who've gotten a bad review, who've actually been able to turn it around and just say, hey, it was like a free consultant, and they actually modified their listing sometimes to actually improve things that weren't good, or improve the listing explanation of what they're offering, so that people aren't confused or mistaken in terms of what they thought they were going to get.
Yes, and look, guys, I got a bad review. The guest called Airbnb to close my account. That's how bad it was, and it's still there. It's still alive. And I made major changes because of that bad review. We're talking about I even changed floors and everything else. And it was really bad, and it made me very conscious for my next. I had all the bookings coming right up, but that review was right there on the front page, on the first page, for a long time until other reviews just moved it along. But you survive reviews. We survive them. And like you said, Chip, it's a great experience for you to change what needs to be changed. And when you comment back if you're going to answer the review, be professional. Don't take it personal. Don't be vindictive. Don't get emotional. I did. It wasn't my best moment of life, but you know, you still do because it's your home, and you're like, oh my God, how dare you say those things about me? And you want to put your side of the story, but you have to just like put your hands up and say, thank you for the feedback. And and you know, I will take it into consideration and I will make the appropriate changes or whatever it is. But don't engage in this she said, because if you have 10 reviews and one of them is not great, people read around that.
You'll do fine. You know, this is interesting. I'm going to put a plug in here for the Airbnb Open, which we're doing in Paris in November, because part of what we're talking about here is how do you learn best practices of hosting? And so the kinds of things that Evelyn is talking about, we had 1,500 hosts in San Francisco in November. Evelyn was here for that. Evelyn, did you actually teach? Were you a host educator?
No, I was not an educator. I'm hoping to be an educator in the next one. Hint, hint.
Okay. Well, this year we'll have 6,000 hosts from 80 countries. I can't tell you yet who some of the amazing famous speakers are going to be, but we have a really great thing. And so for those who actually came to the Airbnb Open last year, the registration starts June 1st. And then for everybody else, it starts June 15th. And there's an early bird registration that goes till July 15th and makes it only $250. So I would just, for those of you who really want to go and experience Paris in a way that you never have before, because we're going to have unique adventures around Paris that are part of your ticket price. So yeah, join us.
Yeah, and I'm actually going this year as well, you know, and I'm actually want to do a little bit of a short trip, go to Amsterdam, because I've never been to Amsterdam before, but I've been to Paris a couple of times. So I am definitely looking forward. It is a great event. You know, think about going to camp with everybody, you know, that you could talk about. And those damn sheets that the whites don't come white. And, you know, because, come on, how many times can you talk about sheets and towels and laundry with your friends? They're like, what? Where have you gone, man? So yeah, it was a great experience. I mean, we did a fantastic job in their Open last year. Imagine this year, I cannot even think of 6,000 hosts in one city. So if you are planning to go, I'm going to say start booking your Airbnb early on and you know, get some places. Read the descriptions, read the captions of those photos. Go ahead, Chip.
That's it. I think that's all we have time for. I just love the fact that you did this, Evelyn. I mean, it really means a lot to me that you actually are helping hosts around the world get better at opening their homes and opening their hearts.
Yes, you know, one of the things that I always say, and it's, I'm not just my home. The Airbnb brand, if someone goes to an Airbnb in Paris or California and they have a bad experience, they will not use us. So my job is to make sure that you as hosts do a good job so those guests come back to us and they have a great experience. And guys, we are responsible for somebody's vacation. We are responsible for somebody's dream. This is a huge responsibility, and it is of value. People will love you. You know, I mean, come on, like they give you flowers and gifts and chocolates. Always welcome. So yeah, but thank you so much, Chip. Really, yeah. I appreciate that you've taken the time to come and talk to us. This webinar will be up on the website for you guys for replay and everything else. And you know, I'm hoping the next time I'm gonna get Brian. That's my.
Oh, I'll work on that. I
haven't asked him yet. I figured because it's hospitality, it needed to be you first.
Yes, thank you.
But Brian is gonna be next.
All right.
But thank you, really, thank you, guys. And we'll do a recap later on about all of it. But thank you so much, Chip.
Thank you, Evelyn. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.